Nobody remembers the name of the first species the Vorith conquered. Their records simply list them as Target 1. That was 3,000 years ago. Since then, 163 more civilizations had fallen beneath Vorith weapons. Some had begged for mercy. Others had fought with courage. All of them had lost. The Vorith did not hate the species they destroyed. They did not enjoy causing suffering. To them, conquest was simply the natural order of things. The strong consumed the weak. The advanced absorbed the primitive. This was how the universe worked, and the Vorith had proven themselves the strongest of all. High Commander Drath had personally overseen the last 47 conquests. He was old by Vorith standards, his gray scales marked with ceremonial scars from dozens of campaigns. Victory had become routine to him. He no longer felt excitement when a new world fell. He felt only the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. Today, he reviewed data on the next target. A small planet called Earth, orbiting a yellow star in a quiet arm of the galaxy. The inhabitants called themselves humans. They had not yet developed faster-than-light travel. They were still fighting wars amongst themselves over patches of dirt and imaginary lines on maps. Their most powerful weapons were nuclear devices that could barely scratch Vorith hull plating. Subcommander Vaughn stood beside Drath, presenting the tactical assessment. Vaughn was young and eager, still hungry for glory. He spoke with barely contained enthusiasm. Their planet is divided into nearly 200 separate governments, Vaughn said. They cannot even agree on basic facts about their own world. Half of them deny scientific evidence that contradicts their beliefs. They spend more resources fighting each other than exploring their own solar system. Drath made a sound of mild amusement. How long until conquest? 3 rotations at most. Possibly 2. They have no orbital defenses, no planetary shields, no unified military command. Their largest nations possess nuclear arsenals, but our shields will absorb any attack they attempt. Boring, Drath said, but necessary. The High Council wants their resources. Their planet is rich in metals and water. The invasion fleet assembled over the following days. 200 warships, each one carrying 5,000 ground troops. 1 million soldiers in total, more than enough to crush any resistance the primitives could offer. Drath watched the fleet take formation from his position on the flagship Eternal Triumph. He felt nothing but mild impatience. He wanted this campaign finished so he could return home. What Drath did not know was that humanity had been watching. 6 months earlier, a human deep space monitoring station had detected the Vorith fleet leaving its home territory. The station was officially listed as abandoned, a relic of a space program that had run out of funding decades ago. In truth, it had been quietly maintained by a small team of scientists who believed that humanity was not alone in the universe. When they detected 200 alien warships heading toward Earth, they did not panic. They did not scream or cry or pray. They sent a message to every government on the planet. The message contained sensor data, trajectory calculations, and a simple conclusion. An alien invasion force would arrive in 6 months. For the first time in human history, every nation stopped fighting. Old enemies became allies overnight. Resources that had been hoarded were shared freely. Scientists who had competed against each other now worked side by side. Military leaders who had spent careers planning wars against each other now planned together. A woman named Grace was chosen to lead the unified defense effort. She was not a politician or a general. She was a physicist who had spent her life studying theoretical energy shields. When she learned that an alien invasion was coming, she did not ask for time to grieve or process. She asked for funding. In 6 months, humanity achieved what should have taken centuries. They built a planetary shield using principles Grace had only theorized about. They reverse-engineered technology from 3 crashed Vorith survey drones that governments had been hiding for decades. They constructed a hidden fleet of interceptors armed with weapons designed specifically to penetrate Vorith armor. And they waited. The Vorith fleet emerged from hyperspace and took position behind Earth's moon. Drath ordered the standard broadcast, surrender or die. He expected fear, confusion, desperate pleas for mercy. He had heard them all before. In 164 different languages, Grace appeared on the view screen. Her hair was silver, her eyes calm. She spoke in a steady voice that showed no trace of fear. "We received your message. Our answer is no. We understand your military superiority. We do not care. This is our home. Leave now, or face the consequences. Drath laughed. The sound echoed across the bridge as his officers joined him. The prey was making threats. How amusing. How predictable. How utterly foolish. He ordered a demonstration strike on a coastal city. 2 million humans would die to prove a point. The weapons fired. The beams raced toward Earth, and then they stopped, not deflected, not scattered, simply ceased to exist, swallowed by a shimmering barrier that appeared from nowhere. The bridge fell silent. Drath stared at the tactical display, watching his weapons vanish into an energy field that should not exist. For the first time in 47 campaigns, he felt something cold settle in his chest. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be easy. They were supposed to be conquest number 165. Something had gone very wrong. Silence has a weight to it. On the bridge of the eternal triumph, that weight pressed down on every officer present. They had just witnessed the impossible. Vorith weapons, capable of cracking continents, had vanished into thin air above the blue planet below. The subcommander Vaughn was the first to speak. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. Diagnostics show no malfunction in our weapons systems. The beams fired correctly. They simply stopped. High Commander Drath did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, watching the faint shimmer of the energy barrier that surrounded Earth. It pulsed gently, almost mockingly, as if inviting them to try again. Impossible, Drath finally said. The preliminary scans showed no planetary defenses. No shields. Nothing. The scans were accurate at the time, Vaughn said carefully. They must have built this in the 6 months since our survey drones passed through their system. Built a planetary shield in 6 months. Drath turned to face his subordinate. That is not possible. It took our civilization 800 years to develop shield technology. These creatures have not even left their own world. But the evidence floated before them, undeniable and absolute. The humans had done something that defied all logic. Drath made his decision quickly. He had not become High Commander by accepting defeat easily. All ships advance to close range. Concentrate fire on a single point. No shield can withstand sustained bombardment from 200 warships. The fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Vorith discipline was legendary across the galaxy. Every ship knew its position, its role, its purpose. They had destroyed civilizations with this same precise coordination. They would destroy this one too. For 6 hours, the bombardment continued. 200 warships poured energy into the human shield. The beams were bright enough to be visible from Earth's surface, turning the night sky into an endless display of artificial lightning. Cities watched in awe and terror as their shield absorbed attack after attack. Inside the Terran Defense Council bunker, Grace monitored the shield's power levels. The numbers held steady. The shield was not weakening. If anything, it was growing stronger, feeding on the energy the Vorith were pouring into it. They are persistent, said one of her advisors. How long do we wait? Until they are tired, Grace replied. Until they are confused. Until they believe they have seen everything we can do. Then we show them what we are hiding. Above, Drath watched his fleet's energy reserves dropping. 6 hours of sustained fire had accomplished nothing. The shield remained intact. His officers exchanged worried glances, though none dared voice their concerns. Then the shield dropped. For one glorious moment, Drath believed they had won. The barrier simply vanished, leaving Earth exposed and defenseless. He opened his mouth to order the killing strike. The words never left his throat. Sensor alarms screamed across every ship in the fleet. Contacts appearing from everywhere at once. From behind asteroids. From the dark side of the moon. From what had appeared to be dead satellites and space debris. Thousands of small ships, moving faster than anything the Vorith had ever encountered. Human ships. Human weapons. Human revenge. The battle that followed was not what the Vorith expected. They were accustomed to fighting enemies who formed neat lines and followed predictable tactics. The humans fought like animals. Their small interceptors swarmed around Vorith warships, attacking from angles that made no tactical sense. They targeted weak points that should have been impossible to identify. They moved with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. Vorith weapons fired into the chaos, but the human ships were too fast. For every interceptor they destroyed, 3 more took its place. and the human weapons cut through Vorith shields like they were not even there. In the first hour, 12 Vorith warships exploded. In the second hour, 25 more fell. Drath watched his fleet die around him. He had never experienced anything like this. Every battle he had fought had followed the same pattern. The enemy resisted briefly, then collapsed. The enemy accepted their fate. The enemy surrendered. These humans did not surrender. They did not collapse. They fought like they had nothing to lose, like death meant nothing to them, like victory was the only outcome they could imagine. "Order all ships to retreat," Drath finally said. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. "Fall back to the asteroid belt. We need to regroup." The Vorith fleet limped away from Earth. 163 ships remained from the original 200. 37 warships had been destroyed in just 2 hours. It was the single worst defeat in Vorith military history. As the fleet reached safe distance, a transmission arrived from Earth. Grace appeared on screen again. Her expression had not changed. She still looked calm, almost peaceful. "You have lost 37 ships," she said. "We have lost 900 pilots. Each of them knew they would die. Each of them volunteered anyway. That is the difference between us, Commander. You fight because conquest is convenient. We fight because this is our home. Withdraw now, and we will let you leave. Continue this attack, and we will show you what humans truly are when they are cornered." The transmission ended. Drath stood in silence, staring at the empty screen. Around him, his officers waited for orders. None came. For the first time in his long career, the High Commander of the Vorith invasion fleet had no idea what to do next. He had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. He had found something else entirely. He had found prey that fought back. Fear is a strange thing for a conqueror. The Vorith had caused fear in countless species across the galaxy. They had watched civilizations crumble at the mere sight of their fleets. They had enjoyed the terror in alien eyes as cities burned and worlds fell. But feeling fear themselves? That was something new. Subcommander Vaughn could see it in the eyes of every officer on the bridge. They tried to hide it behind professional masks, but the emotion was there. Doubt, uncertainty, something close to panic. The fleet had retreated to the asteroid belt, licking its wounds. 37 warships destroyed, thousands of crew members dead, and the humans had not even pursued them. They had simply returned to their planet and raised their shield again, as if daring the Vorith to try once more. "We need to understand what happened," Vaughn said to High Commander Drath. "Our weapons should have penetrated their shields. Their ships should not have been able to move that fast. Nothing in our intelligence suggested they had these capabilities." Drath said nothing. He stood at the viewport, staring at the distant blue that had humiliated him. His claws scraped slowly against the metal railing, leaving thin grooves in the surface. "Run a complete analysis," Drath finally ordered. "I want to know everything about these creatures. Their history, their culture, their technology, everything." The intelligence division worked through the night. They pulled data from captured transmissions, intercepted broadcasts, and the survey drone records that had first identified Earth as a target. What they found disturbed them in ways the battle could not. Vaughn presented the report to Drath in his private quarters. His hands shook as he activated the display. "Humans are not a unified species," Vaughn began. "They have never been unified. Their entire history is a record of war. They have been killing each other since before they developed writing. Many species fight amongst themselves," Drath said dismissively. "It is common in primitive cultures. Not like this." Vaughn pulled up images and data. "They have invented thousands of different ways to kill. Swords, guns, bombs, chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons. They have used all of them against each other. They have committed mass killings of their own kind. Millions dead in single conflicts. They call these events wars, and they have had thousands of them." Drath studied the images. Battlefields covered in human bodies. Cities reduced to rubble. Weapons designed specifically to cause maximum pain and suffering. The scale of violence was unlike anything he had seen in conquered species. "This is their history with each other," Vaughn continued. "While divided, while fighting amongst themselves. Imagine what they can do now that they have a common enemy." The weight of those words hung in the air. Drath began to understand what had happened. The Vorith had conquered peaceful civilizations, species that had evolved beyond violence, races that surrendered because they could not comprehend deliberate cruelty. Humans understood cruelty. They had invented it. They had refined it over thousands of years. And now they had turned all that violent potential toward a single target. There is more, Vaughn said quietly. The planetary shield they deployed. Our analysts believe they built it in 6 months. That is impossible. So we thought. But our drones passed through their systems 6 months ago. At that time, they had no shield technology at all. Between then and now, they unified their entire species, shared all their technological secrets, and built a defense system that surpasses anything we have encountered. Drath sat down heavily. The implications were staggering. In 6 months, facing extinction, humanity had achieved more than many species accomplished in centuries. They had not crumbled under pressure. They had not surrendered to despair. They had become stronger. We underestimated them, Drath said. We underestimated what fear can do to them, Vaughn corrected. When humans are afraid, they do not freeze. They fight. They adapt. They overcome. Our attack did not weaken them. It made them dangerous. A communication alert interrupted them. The High Council was responding to Drath's request for reinforcements. He had sent the message hours ago, hoping for additional ships to crush the human resistance. The response was brief: request denied. Complete the conquest with available forces or face consequences. Drath read the message twice. The Council did not believe his reports. They thought he was exaggerating, making excuses for his failure. They had never lost a conquest. They could not imagine that this one might be different. What are your orders? Vaughn asked. Drath stood and walked to the viewport again. Earth was still visible, a tiny blue point of light in the darkness. Such a small world, such a primitive species. And yet they had done what no one else had managed in 3,000 years. They had made the Vorith bleed. We attack again, Drath said. Tomorrow, with everything we have. Commander, with respect, we have already lost 37 ships. If we continue this assault, then we will lose more. Drath turned to face his subordinate. But I will not be the first commander in Vorith history to retreat from primitives. I will not return home in disgrace. We will break these humans, or we will die trying. Vaughn wanted to argue. He wanted to point out that dying trying was not a victory. He wanted to suggest that sometimes retreat was wisdom, not cowardice. But he said nothing. He simply bowed and left to prepare the fleet. Tomorrow, they would attack again. Tomorrow, more Vorith would die. And somewhere on that little blue planet, the humans were waiting. They had been waiting for this moment their entire violent history. Grace had not slept in 3 days. The bunker was cold and filled with the hum of machines, but she barely noticed anymore. Screens surrounded her, showing data from every satellite, every sensor, every scout ship watching the enemy fleet. The Vorith were still out there, wounded but not defeated. They will come back, she said to her advisors. They have to. Their pride will not let them retreat. General Park nodded. He was an old soldier who had fought in 3 wars before the aliens arrived. Now those wars seemed like children's games compared to what they faced. Our pilots are ready. We lost 900 in the first battle, but 10,000 more have volunteered to take their place. 10,000 who know they might die, Grace said quietly. 10,000 who know they will die, Park corrected. And they volunteered anyway. That is who we are. Across the planet, humanity waited. Cities that had been at war with each other months ago now shared resources and information freely. Scientists from rival nations worked together in laboratories. Soldiers who had been trained to kill each other now stood side by side, watching the skies. In a small town in America, a man named David sat in a hangar, running checks on his interceptor. He was 32 years old, a former crop duster who had learned to fly before he could drive. When the call came for pilots, he had been one of the first to volunteer. His wife had cried when he told her. His children had not understood. How could he explain to them that some things were worth dying for? How could he make them see that if he did not fight, there would be no future for them anyway? He finished his checks and walked outside. The stars were bright tonight, brighter than he had ever seen them. Somewhere up there, alien warships were planning their next attack. Somewhere up there, death was waiting. David was not afraid of death. He was afraid of failing. He was afraid of watching his world burn while he did nothing. In the asteroid belt, the Vorith fleet prepared for its final assault. High Commander Drath had not slept either. He stood on the bridge of the Eternal Triumph, watching his remaining ships form up. 163 vessels. Still a formidable force by any standard. still enough to destroy most civilizations. But these were not most civilizations. These were humans. All ships report ready, Subcommander Vaughn announced. Energy reserves at maximum. Weapons charged. Ground troops standing by for deployment. We will not need ground troops, Drath said. This time, we destroy everything. No occupation. No resources. Just complete annihilation. Vaughn hesitated. Commander, that goes against standard protocol. The High Council wants the planet's resources preserved. The High Council is not here. Drath turned to face his officers. They do not understand what we are dealing with. These humans are not like other species. If we leave even a handful alive, they will rebuild. They will grow stronger. They will come for us. The only way to defeat them is to destroy them completely. The fleet moved out of the asteroid belt, heading toward Earth. 163 warships in attack formation. This time, there would be no warning, no demand for surrender, no demonstration strikes. This time, there would be only death. On Earth, alarms began to sound. Grace watched the tactical display as the Vorith fleet approached. They were coming fast, faster than before. They were angry. They were desperate. All pilots to launch positions, she ordered. Activate secondary defenses. This is it. Across the planet, interceptors lifted off from hidden bases. Thousands of small ships rising into the darkness, each one carrying a pilot who knew they might not return. David was among them, his hands steady on the controls, his heart beating faster than it ever had. Remember what we are fighting for. Grace's voice came through every radio. Not for governments, not for nations, for our children, for our future, for our home. The two fleets met at the edge of Earth's atmosphere. Vorith warships unleashed everything they had, trying to overwhelm the planetary shield before the human interceptors could engage. For a moment, the shield flickered. Energy levels dropped dangerously low. Then the interceptors arrived. The battle was chaos and fire and death. Human pilots dove into the Vorith formation, targeting weapon systems and shield generators. Vorith point defense cannons tried to track the small ships, but the humans moved too fast, changed direction too quickly. David found himself facing a Vorith cruiser 3 times the size of his interceptor. Its guns tracked him, spitting energy bolts that missed by meters. He dove beneath its hull, fired his weapons into a vulnerable joint, and pulled away as the cruiser's side exploded. Got one, he shouted into his radio. Good kill, Park's voice responded. Keep moving. Do not slow down. Around him, other pilots were not so lucky. He saw interceptors vanish in flashes of light as Vorith weapons found their targets. He saw friends die. He saw strangers die. He kept flying, because stopping meant dying. And dying meant failing. And David refused to fail. Death has a rhythm in battle. It comes in waves, in patterns, in moments of terrible clarity. David had found that rhythm now. His hands moved without thinking. His eyes tracked targets without effort. He was not a man anymore. He was a weapon point. 2 hours into the battle, the human fleet had lost 800 pilots. The Vorith had lost 23 warships. The math was brutal but simple. Humanity was winning through sacrifice, trading lives for victories, bleeding so their enemy would bleed more. On the bridge of the eternal triumph, High Commander Drath watched his fleet crumble. Subcommander Vaughn stood beside him, his scales pale with exhaustion and fear. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had prepared for an enemy that simply refused to stop. We have lost too many ships, Vaughn said quietly. If we continue, we will not have enough vessels to return home. Drath said nothing. He stared at the tactical display, watching his warships vanish one by one. Each loss was a knife in his pride. Each death was a reminder of his failure. A Vorith commander had never lost a battle. In 3,000 years, not once. And now Drath was watching his entire fleet die around him, destroyed by creatures that should have surrendered months ago. Call the retreat, Vaughn urged. There is no shame in silence. Drath's voice was cold. We do not retreat. We are Vorith. We conquer. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were empty. There was nothing left to conquer here. There was only survival or death. In the chaos of battle, David noticed something. The Vorith flagship had stopped moving. Its escorts had pulled away to engage human interceptors, leaving the massive vessel exposed. Its shield generators were visible, glowing faintly on the ship's spine. David opened a channel to command. I have a clear line on the flagship's shields. If I can take them down, our heavy weapons can finish it. Grace's voice came back immediately. Negative. You cannot survive that approach. Their point defense will, I know. David cut her off. I know what it means. But if that ship falls, their command structure falls with it. Their fleet will scatter. Permission to engage. Silence on the channel. David could hear Grace breathing, could almost feel her weighing his life against the millions on Earth below. Permission granted, she finally said. Thank you, David. For everything. David smiled. It was strange, he thought, how calm he felt. He had always imagined that dying would be terrifying. Instead, he felt only peace. His wife's face floated in his mind. His children's laughter echoed in his memory. He was doing this for them. That was enough that he pushed his throttle to maximum. His interceptor screamed toward the flagship, faster than any ship should move. Alarms blared in his cockpit. His hull began to glow from the heat of his approach that a Vorith gunner saw him coming. Point defense cannons swiveled toward his ship. Energy bolts filled the space around him. One clipped his wing. Another tore through his engine, but David did not stop. He did not turn. He flew straight and true, directly at the shield generators. You want to know what humans call a no-win scenario? He broadcast on an open channel. A Tuesday. Watch this. His ship struck the flagship's shield array at full speed. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface on the bridge of the Eternal Triumph. Drath felt the impact before he understood it. The ship shuddered. Lights flickered. And then the shield status display went dark. Shields are down. Bond shouted. A human ship just. He never finished the sentence. Human weapons, held in reserve for this moment, tore through the flagship's unprotected hull. The bridge decompressed in seconds. Drath felt himself pulled toward the void, his claws scraping uselessly against metal. His final thought was confusion. The human pilot had killed himself. He had sacrificed his own life to destroy one ship. That made no tactical sense, but across the battle, other human pilots were making the same choice. 17 interceptors deliberately rammed Vorith warships. 42 pilots ejected too late, choosing to guide their weapons to impact rather than escape. Humanity was not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win at any cost. The Vorith fleet shattered. Without their flagship, without their commander, the remaining ships lost coordination. Some tried to flee. Some surrendered. Some continued fighting until they were destroyed. By the time the battle ended, 163 Vorith warships had been reduced to debris. Not a single enemy vessel remained intact. On Earth, the cost was counted. 4,300 human pilots dead. Each one a volunteer. Each one a hero. Grace stood in the command bunker, watching the casualty numbers scroll across her screen. Tears ran down her face, but her voice remained steady. Find survivors, she ordered. Any Vorith in escape pods, bring them in. Do not harm them. Her officers looked at her in surprise. They need to go home, Grace explained. They need to tell their people what happened here. They need to warn them. 3 Vorith escape pods were recovered from the debris field. 3 survivors from a fleet of 1 million. Grace met them personally when they were brought to the surface. They cowered before her, expecting execution. Instead, she gave them food, water, and a ship to return home. Tell them, she said simply. Tell them what you saw. Tell them Earth is not worth the price. The survivors fled into the darkness of space, and humanity began to count their dead. Legends do not begin with fanfare. They begin in silence, in whispered conversations, in stories passed between trembling lips. The legend of Earth began in a small room on the Vorith homeworld, where 3 survivors stood before the High Council and spoke of things that could not be true. The council members listened with growing disbelief. 200 warships destroyed. 1 million soldiers dead. A primitive species with impossible technology. Pilots who flew their ships into enemy vessels, smiling as they died. You expect us to believe this? The council leader demanded. You expect us to accept that our greatest fleet was destroyed by creatures who cannot even leave their own star system? The survivors did not argue. They simply stood there, hollow-eyed and broken, repeating what they had witnessed. The shield that absorbed their weapons. The interceptors that moved like ghosts. The human woman who looked at them with pity instead of hatred. The council did not believe them. The official record was written that night. The invasion fleet had been lost to an unknown spatial anomaly. A navigational error. A tragic accident. Earth was removed from future targeting lists, not because of human strength, but because the route was too dangerous and no mention of battle. No mention of defeat. The Vorith had never lost. They could not lose. The very idea was unthinkable. The three survivors were quietly sent to a remote colony, where they lived out their remaining years in silence. Their testimony was classified. Their names were erased from military records. Officially, they had never existed, but the truth has a way of escaping. Soldiers talk. Officers gossip. Fragments of the real story leaked out over the following months. Rumors spread through the ranks like fire through dry grass. Whispers of a blue planet that had defeated the undefeatable. Tales of human pilots who chose death over retreat. The conquered species heard these rumors too. Species that had surrendered, that had been enslaved, that had lost all hope. They listened to the stories of Earth, and something changed in their eyes that if the Vorith could be beaten once, they could be beaten again. The first rebellion began 8 months after the battle. A small species called the Vel rose up against their Vorith overseers. They were crushed, of course. Their leaders were executed. Their cities were burned, but more rebellions followed. Then more still. Each uprising was smaller than the Vorith forces sent to crush it. Each rebellion ended in defeat. But each defeat cost the Dominion ships, soldiers, resources. The Vorith were bleeding from 1,000 small wounds, and they could not stop the bleeding. 50 years passed. The Vorith Dominion, which had stood for 3,000 years, began to crack. Economic strain. Military overextension. Internal divisions. The species they had conquered for generations were no longer afraid. They had heard the legend of Earth. They knew the Vorith could bleed. Grace had died 20 years earlier, peacefully, in her sleep. Her grandchildren now led the Terran Defense Council. The shield still surrounded Earth. The fleet still watched the skies. Humanity had not forgotten the lesson of the invasion. When the Vorith Dominion finally collapsed, humanity received word through intercepted transmissions. The great empire that had threatened to destroy them had torn itself apart. The conquered species were free. Some of those species sent messages to Earth. "Thank you," they said. "Your victory gave us hope. Your legend gave us courage." Humanity did not respond. They did not celebrate. They simply maintained their watch and waited in the decades that followed. Galactic historians attempted to piece together what had happened to the Vorith. They found records of 164 successful conquests. But the 165th target was listed only as classified, loss, do not approach, no details. No explanation. Just a warning and an empty space where a conquest report should have been. The historians dug deeper. They interviewed survivors of Vorith rule. They collected fragments of rumors and whispers. Eventually, they assembled a rough picture of what had happened in that distant star system, a small blue planet. A species of violent, stubborn, impossible creatures. 200 warships that went in and never came out. The story spread across the galaxy. Different species told different versions. Some said the humans had supernatural powers. Others claimed they were demons wearing flesh. A few believed they were simply the most dangerous predators the universe had ever produced. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Humans were survivors. They had evolved on a harsh world, surrounded by things that wanted to kill them. They had spent their entire existence fighting, adapting, and overcoming. When the Vorith came, they did what they had always done. They refused to ever invaded Earth again. Occasionally, ships passed through the system, observing from a safe distance. They saw the blue planet spinning peacefully in its orbit. They saw the faint shimmer of the shield that surrounded it. They saw patrol vessels watching them from the darkness, and they left quickly, without making contact. In the archives of a dozen species, a warning was passed down through generations. A simple message, repeated in 100 different languages. There is a world in the Orion Arm where death itself lives. The Vorith sent their greatest fleet to conquer it. 200 warships, 1 million soldiers. The largest invasion force in galactic history. None of them came back. The world is called Earth. The creatures who live there call themselves humans that do not go there. Do not threaten them. Do not wake them from their watch. Let them sleep. Because if they wake, if they rise, if they turn their eyes toward the stars with anger in their hearts, nothing in the galaxy will be able to stop them. Nothing ever has.